Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 4 of the Dusk Till Dawn podcast, the podcast of the Dawn Network. Now, on the last episode, the superb Sam Derrick spoke to Rebecca Jackson about all things to do with CPRS. So please do have a look if you haven't managed to yet. But without further ado, let's welcome our topic and guest for today's episode. So our topic today is a very interesting one, and it regards the link between culture and disability. And our guest, who has very nicely agreed to come on today, is Abhishek Kulkarni. So how are we, Abhishek?
I'm doing good, mate. How are you doing?
I'm very, very well, thank you. But brilliant. So thanks again for coming on the show today. Super appreciate your time, first of all. But I think it might be worth explaining a little bit about what you do at Centrica, what your role is, how you got there, as well as your brill role within the Voice Network.
Yeah, sounds good, mate. So I started Centrica just over 2 years ago on the commercial marketing grad scheme. So I started in October 2018. Since then, I've kind of done 4 different placements. So I did contact center placement at Leeds, worked in British Gas, Hive, and Centrica Business Solutions, and then kind of rolled off the grad scheme in December of 2020. And now I think my title is proposition lead, essentially product development manager for all our warranty products in the protection portfolio at British Gas, which I'm really, really enjoying. So that's kind of anything to do with EVs, heat pumps, boilers, any of our products which have a warranty, which is quite exciting. And yeah, and I'm also the chair of the Voice Network, which is essentially our ethnicity network at Centrica, promoting a greater awareness about race, culture, and ethnicity within the company.
So you've been around quite a lot then, obviously popping up to Leeds and going all around the company.
Yeah, I thought this had been around for a while. Like, you're making me seem old.
I shouldn't have said anything.
But yeah, so Leeds and then Staines, London, and then it would have been Windsor, but then it was Ruislip, as in my home.
And in terms of your actual role then as well, working with, the different technologies, the new technologies coming in, EVs, heat pumps, exciting times.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. I guess the role is so broad in the sense that I work with kind of our various different EV teams of bringing in partners, and essentially what can we do once they come in? Can we bring them onto various different home care products within our British Gas portfolio? So it's really exciting, loads to do.
I see. So more so working on the residential side of things rather than the sort of industrial side of things with these sort of new technologies.
Yeah, so it's essentially once these customers are brought in, what can we do to monetize them? How can we bring them into our British Gas ecosystem? How can we upsell them various different products? So it's kind of more bringing the customer into British Gas.
That's super. So that's that then. So I guess onto the topic of voice, which you described your role really well. But for the people who don't really know much about voice, could you be able to give them a sort of brief summary of what the network does and how to get more information of it?
Sure. So I guess the network probably kickstarted in September of 2020 during National Inclusion Week, where we rebranded. And the Voice Network has essentially 3 main missions. One is to educate our colleagues, whether that's to do with things about racism, things about culture, various festivals, all different things we can educate people on. Secondly, optimizing and really looking at our data. So that's kind of looking at the diversity of our organization. That's looking at number of people leaving us, why are they leaving us, or even simple things like interviews. Do we have diverse interview panels, and looking at the percentage of numbers of that, and really looking at things and see where we can make a change. And the final mission is all about empowering communities, because I think we can make a difference not just within the company but also outside. So we've been working with quite a few different charities, setting up mentoring schemes with our colleagues and students from schools to essentially give them an insight into what work involves. And for people to find out a bit more, we've got a really active Teams page. So just go on Teams and type in Voice, and it's the first public page. You can just sign up. We run several events over the year. We've got a monthly newsletter, and we've got loads of different opportunities for people to get in touch and come up with suggestions to see how we can kind of continuously improve our messaging and any new ideas which we want to do. But I guess in a nutshell, it's a platform for people to feel safe sharing any difficult experiences, talking openly about racism, and just to kind of educate our company on this very complex issue.
Fantastic. So you're pretty much at the forefront of making this change inside and externally of the organisation, aren't you? So in terms of, you mentioned there's several events over the years, are there any upcoming events that you might want to share to people listening?
So we had an event last week, actually. So it was all to do with kind of talking about culture, faith, and ethnicity. So if you want to watch a recording of that, it's on our Teams page. But I'd also recommend looking on the DNI page on the intranet. That's where you can see not just the Voice Network, but all the other networks you have there. But we do have a really exciting event planned up with the Women's Network sometime in April. And it's going to be about highlighting BAME women at Centrica. So won't disclose too much just yet, but that's a really exciting event coming up in April.
Oh, that sounds super interesting, actually. Fab. I think now then it'd be ideal to jump into the topic of today's episode, which amalgamates both disabilities and culture. So I guess the first point is, why have you decided to talk about this topic today?
I think for me, I think there's loads of things which are taboo in society, but I think disability, is one of them. And I guess it's just kind of my experiences. So I was born in India, came here when I was really, really young, but I kind of go every year. And it's just kind of, the subject of disability has never been a topic which I feel is talked about at all. And even when we look at things like media and movies, and my experiences are simply to do with kind of Indian movies, only recently now are kind of more movies talking about like the mental health, other disabilities which people may or may not, which people may have. And I think it's just, I wanted to talk about the various questions which hopefully you're going to ask me around the link between disability and culture, because I think there are some cultures which are more accepting of disabilities than others, and I think it's quite an interesting topic to spark.
Yeah, definitely. You know what, over recent times, you're completely right, it has become it's always been a very, very huge topic of conversation, but I feel like there's been more emphasis being placed around it, if that's the right word. So I suppose just to dive in around, perhaps a specific example of these different cultural perceptions, is there any chance you could give an example of how a particular disability is perceived differently amongst two different cultures?
So here's just an example I can think of. So I worked at a company called MenCap. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. It's a place for children with special needs, and I worked there part-time during my sixth form year, so during year 12 and year 13. And I had a colleague, and she was kind of from Sri Lanka, slightly older, and we were just having a discussion around children with special needs. And she told me a story that how back in her hometown, and this was good back 20, 30 years ago, to have a child with special needs, it was almost like a curse, and it was almost like a punishment. This is just me like quoting a conversation I had with her like 5-6 years ago. And so that was quite shocking to hear, that that would almost be deemed like a negative thing. And almost that's kind of like a punishment in that sense. And she didn't really know how to go about having those conversations, because I think those, I don't know, ideologies are so kind of deep rooted within people. And I guess if I contrast that to how, like when I came to when I was working at MenCap, the children who were there, they were absolutely fantastic. And I think, again, like I'm struggling to come up with points because it's such a complex issue, but I think there are some regions who don't have the education, who haven't been educated enough about disabilities and special needs to come to a more kind of substantive opinion on it, if that makes sense. And I think now the media hopefully is sharing more things. So just another example I could think of, there was a Bollywood movie which came out, I think over 5-6, actually over a decade ago, roughly translated to English means stars are on the earth. And it's basically about a kid who has dyslexia, and he's kind of ridiculed by his dad for being dyslexic. He didn't really understand that dyslexia was a disability, and he'd get ridiculed by his friends, and no one would really understand why he was writing slowly, or why he was how he was making errors in his spelling. And it showed him going to a special needs school and how they brought out the best in him. So even though he wasn't the most articulately able, he had a fantastic knack for art and creativity, and that was highlighted beautifully in the movie to show that just because your child may not be fantastic at one thing doesn't mean they can't be incredible at something else. And I think that was one of the first Bollywood movies I can think of which highlighted the role of disability, and it won so many different awards because it really got everyone thinking that, do you know what, just because your child may have a condition, that doesn't necessarily mean that they can't achieve greatness, because they certainly will.
Completely understood. I think them two examples are perfect, by the way, and they sort of really emphasise what we was talking about, just about society placing more emphasis around this topic of discussion now. So in terms of the two examples you gave, so one with MenCap and the second with the Bollywood movie, I think it'd be interesting to get into sort of where these perceptions may have originated from. So I sort of stumbled across an interesting paper which could help with one of the reasons. And it actually related these different cultural perceptions, such as the two examples that you've mentioned, down to one reason. That reason was, of all things, productivity. And it stated that some cultures tend to be more productive than others, and these more productive cultures often have, negative perceptions of disabilities because they see disabled individuals as people who can't essentially keep up with society.
Yeah.
But this is because these individuals are not, practical enough and not efficient enough to keep up with this sort of enhanced productivity. So my question off the back of that is, do you think these different perceptions stem from one main reason, like the cultural productivity differences as mentioned, or a combination of reasons? And what is this main reason or combination of reasons that you're particularly thinking of?
That's a really interesting, one of the conclusions to come to with that. But I didn't really think of it that way, because I guess you're right. If someone or if a group of individuals are really focused on productivity as an outcome, and then yes, you can imagine someone with a disability or condition may not achieve that levels of productivity which that person may have set a benchmark against to everyone else. That's where kind of negative perceptions will stem from. But if I'm being honest, mate, I genuinely do not know, because all these kind of stories I've heard are literally from like colleagues or whatever, and this was very much like many years ago, and I've not been back, and so I'm just trying to think of what else could it be, because for me it blows my mind that people could even think of it differently. But I just genuinely think it's a mixture of not knowing what the disability is. So I've kind of got a family friend who has autism, and we had never heard of autism back in our kind of like family friend circle back in India ever. Like, we have a massive family, and no one had heard about autism. And it was a case that when the family friend's son was diagnosed with it, it was almost like, what is this, and how do we go about fixing it? And his autism was quite severe in the sense that he's at the age of like 10, 11 now, and can only formulate like single sentences. And I guess if you have a group of people who A, have never seen it before, B, don't know how to deal with it, that's where negative perceptions, because again, it's something quite foreign. You've never seen something before. And then I guess I actually did my EPQ back in school on this, if it's genetic or environmental for autism in particular. But I guess you have that blame culture. So if someone is different to everyone else, there's almost this consensus that, is this kind of the parents' fault, or is this the upbringing's fault? And I guess it's just people aren't educated enough on it. So I think that's where these various different misconceptions come from. Like people think, you were bad in your previous life, hence why you've been given this. And there's a lot of kind of spirituality, which I don't personally believe in, but that's also links to it. So I think it's a myriad of different opinions and perceptions that people have. I generally don't think you could stagnate it to just one. And again, my personal experiences are simply due to like family friends from India. If we're talking about the topic of culture more broadly, I'm pretty sure that there are different cultures in different parts of the country who have completely different views to what I've just kind of highlighted. So it's such a combination of different things. I don't know if we'll ever be able to pinpoint an exact cause.
It's quite interesting you say actually about blame culture, because it's so true, isn't it? It happens everywhere you go. But in terms of education, I think that is one of the main or one of the reasons for these sort of differences in perceptions. But also it could be one of the great solutions to it, right? Something that could really help ease these differences in perceptions. And that's sort of the next question I was going to go on to. So is there any sort of solutions apart from education perhaps, or maybe just really investing in emphasizing education across the globe, in fact? So is there any solutions that could ease these negative perceptions of disabilities in some cultures?
I think acceptance is one of them, because I think if I think about like my family friends, when the topic around autism was being kind of discussed, they weren't accepting it. It was almost like, this isn't real, this doesn't exist. Or even when there's almost that feeling of why did this happen? And I think once you're in that state of mind, it's very difficult to kind of look at, right, what are we going to do next? How are we going to do what's best for either the child or the parent or family relative, etc. And I don't know how, because I'm not having any personal experiences, don't know how that kind of acceptance comes. But I guess if you intertwine that with the education arm of things, and I think having support from one another is really important. And I think creating awareness about these things does help with that. So if you have gone through these experiences and you know someone else who has gone through it similar, I think it helps. So this is probably going to be really controversial, but I was going on like Instagram yesterday and I saw there was someone talking about their condition. I can't remember exactly what condition it was, but using platforms like Instagram to share their personal experiences. And I think I spoke to Sam about this. People almost don't want to talk about their disabilities because they think it might perceive negatively on them, especially to an employer or someone else. And as you can imagine, we know there's a problem in terms of diversity within corporations. People who are, I don't know, from ethnic minority backgrounds may feel that they're already at a disadvantage in some areas, may feel that they don't want to disclose their disability as well. So I think that leads to even more problems down the line. So I think to answer your question of what more people can do, I think acceptance, kind of getting help when needs to be, and really relying on people around you to kind of get through whatever situation you kind of land yourself in, because I think it completely depends on if it's a family issue, if it's a work employment issue, or something that's happening in school. But it's as I mentioned, it's a very complicated issue.
Just exactly what you say. It's very difficult to pinpoint one main reason, isn't it? But I think this is where Centrica does really well in terms of getting the networks involved. You mentioned, people find it really difficult to talk about on social media platforms. You mentioned, having a look on Instagram. And if you've got a disability at Centrica, for example, you can find a safe and comfortable place to speak about it with others, with the Dawn network, likewise different topics with the Voice network and so on. So very difficult to pinpoint one specific topic, but the speech on sort of education and acceptance coming with that education is a really interesting key focal point. And it'd be interesting to see as time comes on where that will come from. So that is all the questions I've got for you though, Abby. So that was really quick, but thank you very much for coming on the show today and, talking about yourself as well as this really interesting topic of discussion regarding disability and culture. But like we say with every episode, hopefully this podcast can filter through Centrica as a great way of spreading awareness, which today was all about the link between culture and disability. So once again, thank you very much for coming on today, Abby, and thanks to everyone who has listened in. Until next time.